Very good evening to you, Michael.
Hi, good evening.
Do you agree that it seems to be sort of settling around the customs union? The single market is gone, isn't it, really, as an issue? It's the customs union that seems to be the fissure, because...
Yes, it does seem to be that way. I think there was a period in the immediate aftermath of the referendum when there were some Labour and Liberal Democrat figures who argued that we should remain in the single market. Obviously, that was a big issue during the course of the referendum campaign. It now seems as though the government is clear that it wants to leave the single market for reasons we can discuss and which Nick Watt touched on earlier. And it does seem to be that the divide in the Commons is on the question of whether or not we should remain in the customs union.
And maybe even in the government, because Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, is apparently something of a fan of the customs union. You are not yourself, are you?
Again, I think there are choices here. And I think in the past views have been attributed to members of the government when in fact there is a continuum and a subtlety about some of their positions. But in essence, I think we'd be better off outside the customs union for the reasons that Rishi Sunak encapsulated in your package earlier. I think that being outside the customs union means that we can negotiate our own trade deals with other countries, not just economic superpowers like the United States, but also emerging markets and developing nations as well. But nothing is ever cost-free, and the point has been made that there are certainly one or two aspects of leaving the customs union that have to be carefully handled. And I think that in her speech tomorrow, the Prime Minister will probably set a direction of travel which is likely to take us out of the customs union, but she'll acknowledge, I suspect, that it's not as simple as clicking your fingers, though I do believe that it is the desirable outcome.
And so you though, would be urging her, be a bit firmer on that, be a bit clearer, a bit cleaner on the Brexit. Customs union isn't going to help us. We need to be able to sign trade deals. Just get on with it.
That is my instinct and my analysis. But again, one of the things that I've said today in other interviews is I'm not in government anymore. I don't have access to all the intelligence about what other countries might propose, and I don't have access to the high-quality briefings that the top-quality civil servants who are in the DEXU department can provide. As things seem to me, on the basis of the facts as I see them, I'd be outside. But as ever, I'll always allow the possibility I might be wrong.
A loyal member of the party, and you'll support her. OK, look, let's just go through some other aspects of Brexit, headline aspects. Transition deal.
Yes.
A lot of Brexiteers basically think a transition period is just a way of slowing it all down, potentially kicking it into the long grass. How long for you do you think a transition could be and kind of still be compatible with the views of the public?
Well, again, until I see any transition deal, I wouldn't be certain whether or not it was a good thing or a bad thing. I can see the case. It's been made that, particularly in the realm of financial services, there are some people who are concerned about what might be termed a cliff edge. I'm radically sceptical about that position. I think that certainty, a clean Brexit, would be in all our interests. But again, in a spirit of what's the right word? Openness to the possibility that again that I might be wrong. I'm prepared to see the case put. So I have a strong instinct in favour against.
Give us a timescale. I mean, do you think 2 years, 4 years? I mean, obviously, if it was 28 years, you're going to say, come on, that's just ridiculous.
Well, but my own
3 years, is that ridiculous?
No, my own instinct is, my own preference, firm preference, would be that we should be firm and clear about what our position is with respect to the European Union by 2019, that we shouldn't have a transitional deal after that. I will, of course, look at one.
You're willing to be open-minded? No,
willing to be open-minded, but my strong predisposition, both on the customs union and on the transition deal, is exactly as you said, that the clear advantages are outside the customs union, no transition.
Right. Let's go on to immigration, because I'm interested in whether you believe EU citizens should have some kind of access to the UK that maybe isn't given to everybody else in the world. So, for example, if an EU citizen has a job in the UK or a job offer in the UK, would you be happy for them, if you like, to come and have the right to work in the UK?
Again, my strong preference is that we should have absolute equality in our immigration policy between EU citizens and non-EU citizens. I think we should have a colour-blind, non-discriminatory immigration policy. Now, again, in the final deal, you know, as I said earlier, at risk of, yes, I would not want to strain at a gnat, as it were. If there were a specific preference that were given to Belgian dentists over other dentists, and that was the price of securing a deal in which everything else was perfect, then I'd be perfectly happy to have.
So can I just be clear? In 2020,
done by someone from Brussels.
2020, I come back from my holiday in Spain, and I come back and I arrive at Luton Airport or somewhere. There's going to be 2 queues for passport control. One is going to say UK citizens go this way. The other is going to say Europe, India, China, America, you all go that way. Is that how it's going to be, or is there going to be? Is the EU queue going to stay an EU queue as it is?
No, I suspect the former. I mean, as you mentioned, I've recently been in America. America has a situation where it's American citizens, and then there are different types of visas. If you've got the right type of visa, accelerated access, it may well be the case that we grant a particular type of visa to valued workers or others.
Very clear. Philip Hammond sort of set out a plan B yesterday of this kind of, look, if you give us a tough time and we can't trade, we'll obviously have to make ourselves competitive, we'll have to have very low taxes, and we'll have to be, in all sorts of ways, something of a threat to your economies. We'll change our model if necessary. Do you think that was a good tactic, or is it a good vision for what Britain could be post-Brexit?
I think it was wise and nuanced positioning by the Chancellor. I think that the assumption had been by many, not all, that the EU27 have all the cards in this process. I think three things happened during the course of the past week which show that it's not that simple. The first, Michel Barnier, the EU negotiator, made it clear that access to the City of London and our capital markets is important for the EU27. The second, Philip Hammond pointed out that irrespective of the deal, when we take back control of a number of economic levers, then we can make ourselves a more attractive destination for investment. And, of course, there was the intervention by the President-elect offering a potential trade deal. That alters the terms of trade.
And certainly we've got cards in our hand. But, I mean, do you see a kind of... I suppose it's a paradox, really, which is many people, and everybody interprets the public votes on June the 23rd in their own way, but many people saw it as, if you like, something of a rejection of a way things had been done.
Yes.
Big business. Your campaign actually did campaign explicitly against big business. And perhaps a feeling by the public, these people have been getting away with murder. I mean, basically, they don't seem to pay any tax. They sort of run around the world doing what they want. The irony that post-Brexit we would become a tax haven for big companies, is that what the public had intended when they made that vote?
It's a very good point, but I think there's a distinction to be made. There's a sort of corporatist Davos man approach, rigging the rules of the market in favour of incumbents and the already wealthy, and there's a slightly different approach. In fact, I would argue a radically different approach, which is we're in favour of free markets, not big business. We're in favour of competition and insurgents,
you're talking about cutting the taxes of internationally mobile companies. They've got to be internationally mobile in order to induce them to come here to pay the reduced tax rates. Is that what people thought they were getting? Lower taxes for internationally mobile big businesses? I
think more jobs, certainly, and making sure that our economy flourished. But I think there is a critical distinction here, which, again, was... it emerged, you're absolutely right, during the referendum campaign. We have, in the European Union, not a free market, but a rigged market. We have one that favours big business because they can erect rules that make it more difficult for the new companies that we want to see generating growth and jobs. It's a big argument.
Probably not
we'll have the chance to return to
one for right now.
No,
Look, just one very quick one. You wrote Theresa May's speech last week. You wrote your version of it in the Times newspaper. In that, you mocked the British aid budget. You said there are too many Ethiopian girl bands, which is a reference to something our aid budget had spent money on. Just a quick one.
Yes.
2020, when we're a kind of Brexit Britain, more common sense and less run for the benefit of a sort of liberal elite, do you think we'll stick with the 0.7% aid target, overseas aid target?
I think the government will, yes. And I can explain...
And should, as well.
I have a whole approach to how we might actually tackle international development, but that's a subject for another day.
Probably it is. Michael, should we get on negotiating with the US now, while we're still members of the EU? There is a sort of legal argument about how far you can go down that path.
Yes, and I think that you certainly can't sign a deal until you're outside the EU, probably outside the customs union, as we were discussing earlier. But you can certainly have conversations, sometimes quite detailed conversations, preparatory to that. I don't think there's any inconsistency between staying in the EU and laying some of the groundwork for a potential trade deal.
Let's tie you down. I mean, how long after we come out? Let's suppose we come out March 19. How long after do you think we can actually sign a trade deal with the US? I mean, obviously, there's the will there.
If the will is there, and Nagaman Chetty quite rightly points out some of the issues that would require to be tackled, it would be theoretically possible, I imagine, to have done most of the work in order to ensure that a deal was signature ready by the time that we leave in 2019. That would be my assumption. I stress, I'm not a trade expert, not a trade negotiator, and we heard from Shankar Singham.
Shankar Singham obviously thinks it could take quite a long time. It might be quick. It could take long. We just simply have no idea. Good agree.
Absolutely. You know, the average trade deal, bilateral trade deal between nations, takes around 2 years to negotiate. But obviously, if you have very sophisticated and developed economies, as our own and America's are, then that could sometimes take longer. But then if you have strong political will, that can accelerate the process.
Yeah. One of the other things Trump said in the interview was that he is minded to put a 35% tariff on BMWs made in Mexico and brought into the United States. If he did that, he would more or less be breaking apart the rules-based trading system that the world has painfully erected in the last 50 years at the leadership, actually, of the UK and the US. How do you think the world, the global community, should react when a big, powerful country just tramples over the rules?
Well, I think the most important thing to recognise is that the case for free trade, which the Prime Minister wants to make, she wants this country to be a global leader for free trade, should be made as vigorously as possible. One of the things I disagree with Donald Trump about is his attachment to protection. I think it's a good thing that he wants...
He's not going to listen to you, Michael. He's not going to listen to you on it. He's not listening to anyone on it.
No.
He's got his mind made up.
Certainly won't...
The people have spoken, and he's going to put that...
He certainly won't... pay too much attention to a British backbencher.
What should the world do if he puts a 35% tariff on BMW imports into the US because he doesn't like their plant over there, so I'm going to put a tax on that one?
One thing that's been striking is that it's already been the case that as a result of indicating a direction of travel, that we've already had decisions made by Ford, Carrier and a number of other American companies to keep jobs and need to shift jobs to the United States that would otherwise have done.
What should we do when he does that? Should BMW just say, sorry, we'll come and move to the United States and take the jobs away from Mexico? Or should the world just say, OK, Mr. Trump, you're a big man, you can do what you want? Or should the world frame a response to the person who breaks up the international trade system, which you, by the way, are a great supporter of?
I am a supporter of. Yes.
What should the world do?
Well, I think at this stage, to take it one step back, Trump is making the first move in a negotiation. And one of the things about a negotiation, certainly with a deal maker like Trump, is that his starting position is not going to be the end position. So I think the first thing to do is to use the skills that we have in the Foreign Office and the connections, political connections and others that we have in order to be able to ensure that we are in a position, as far as possible, to shape and to frame American policy in a way that recognises Donald Trump's desire to boost jobs and growth in America without necessarily going down the path that as you've sketched, would not be in all our interests.
I mean, I've listened to a lot of your interviews today, Michael. I think that is the weakest answer you have given. What do we do when this bloke does stuff that we really, 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 in our Atlantic tradition, have come to not like? I mean, he called NATO obsolete. Well, that would actually, by the way, be the entire programme would be devoted to that if we knew whether he
you are right. There were many, many scoops in the interview. Two things I'd say. The first is, with respect to how we ensure that the World Trading Organization succeeds, I'm not its General Secretary. As I said earlier, trade is not an area in which I have a Regis professorship. But I do think that when it comes to NATO, that it's important to recognise that his position, and this is, I think, one of the interesting things about Trump, is that candidate Trump and President Trump occupy different positions. When he was talking about NATO on the stump, the impression he gave or generated was that he wanted to rip the whole thing up. But in the interview, it's clear that he has two concerns about NATO. And you may think they're ill-founded, but his two specific concerns are that NATO doesn't do enough to counter Islamist terrorism and there is insufficient burden sharing. Now, people are perfectly at liberty to say that that view is naive or wrong, but it's different from wanting to rip it up. And I think, therefore, when we explore in greater detail what the Trump economic plan is, I don't think it will have quite the same characterisation that we draw from what he said so far.
Did your heart, Michael, not sink? You sat there in a room with him when he basically trashed, in odd phrases, stuff that was very dear to you. The Iraq War. Probably the worst thing that's ever happened in the history of the universe, or what, I can't remember his words.
Yes.
I mean, that was something of very dear cause to you. You must have... Do you really feel this guy is someone who is a friend of the British and Churchill and our Atlantic tradition? Or do you think he is essentially an anathema to us? I'm interested in where you stand in your heart on Trump.
No, I said during the election that had I been an American, I would have voted for Hillary Clinton. And indeed, if I, now I think that Hillary Clinton would be a stronger and a better president for the world than Donald Trump. But the American people made their choice. And I think the right thing for our government to do is to have the best possible business-like relationship with the American president, whoever he or she is, in order to try to shape things in the interest of the British people and in the interest of the international order. The other thing I would say is that if you develop a good business-like relationship with Donald Trump, then my belief is that you can mitigate the worst parts of him and encourage his better angels.
Did you tell him, by the way, that you thought Hillary would be a better president than him? Did that come up in the conversation?
He did chide me for not having predicted his victory or endorsed his position. But to be fair to the president-elect, I don't think he's followed my own journalism quite as closely as some others.
Michael Gove, thanks.
Thank you.